Thanks for joining me again. And tonight I'm going to be reading from one of my older collections. I'm getting ready to launch my website in about a week and a half. And on the site, I'll be promoting my own work, promoting my books of poetry, as well as some of the journalistic work I've done and some of the music. And what I thought I'd do tonight is start off reading a few pieces from my first full collection, which is this one called Street of Knives. Um, you can see it there. It's a really nice looking book. It came out in 1993. And around that time, I was writing freelance as usual, but I was also working as a social worker. And a couple times in the late 80s, I worked in prison as an advocate for inmate families. And then after that, one of the other jobs I had was I was a case manager working with mentally ill homeless in 3 counties. And most of the poems in this book, Street of Knives, came out of those experiences. So I want to read a couple from here and then finish up with a sort of a Memorial Day type poem. But the first piece is called The Warner Hotel Comes Down. The light on the corner falls like sand through the fog, and love is farther away than the rusting hot plate 5 blocks uptown. The Warner is down. Bar doors fly open, spilling wet light on the black street of the dead steel mill town. The Warner is down, a pile of big splinters by the sand, brick, and glass mausoleum in the downtown square. The revitalized, sanitized, dehumanized downtown square, and the Warner came down, evicting the ghosts of ballroom dancers, down and outers, over the hill strippers, old and lonely people, the poor, the weary, the huddled masses tumbled out as the Warner came falling down. An avalanche of rotting timbers, running rats, and bitter steam, with nowhere to go. The Warner is dead. Where will the holy ones go who hear angels and everything else that flashes on the screen? Where will they find a home? In the new Hilton, perhaps? Or maybe all the brand new low-income housing just sprouting up like weeds in Harrisburg, the clean scene. Gone, gone, and gone. Where will the tired men in stolen cars rest uneasily? And where will the runaway girls with cocaine smiles and black and blue memories fall asleep? The Warner is now a blemish removed from the perky face of the city that eats the weak. That's about the last SRO hotel in Harrisburg. It was called the Warner Hotel and had really an amazing history. By the time I wrote this poem, the Warner had become a place where a lot of poor folks and people with mental illness were staying. One of those people is the guy in this next poem, and I changed his name, but this is his story. And it's called Charlie's Nervous. Charlie says the devil appeared in his dream. 6 heads on long swan necks, and it summoned bikers to beat on Charlie. Maybe to beat the lyrical madness right out of him, good-hearted, yet ready to assault. The records confirm Charlie needs more meds. His eyes keep moving from side to side to side, and a good woman, yes, Charlie says, you know the Mormons wear black leather jackets. Jesus, look at Donny Osmond. Oh, yes, they do. Oh, yes, I warned them, never go back to New York. And Charlie will never go back to the mission or back to the men who want sex like they had in prison Stick a pillow in your mouth, Charlie. Charlie is not so big, but Charlie ain't afraid to use a hammer or a knife. And a couple more from Street of Knives. And this is called The Saxophone is an Empty Room. The saxophone is an empty room. Lumpy liquid plaster walls roll into the Jesus painting with eyes that move from changing angles. The saxophone is rusting in the sterno brunch room. The peeling paint in the junky hallway cracks and falls like snow. The saxophone spills roaches in an S-shaped column of Praetorian Guard. A cornucopia horn of plenty, jazz blue steel procession of men in chains. And now one of the funnier pieces in the book, there are a couple actually. This is based on a conversation that really happened and was by a former classmate of mine in my high school. When I went into work in the prison, about half the time I'd run into people I knew from school or from playing b-ball or whatever. And this is one of the poems that I did with a jazz group many years later. And I'll do some pieces from that experience in another reading. But this is called The Chainsaw Kmart Chivalry Game. I had this game going, I got those chainsaws out of the Kmart. Had this game going, I have this drug problem. And I got those chainsaws out of the Kmart clean. I was kind of proud. Shit, man, kind of proud. So I waited around in the parking lot until I see this girl I know. So I tell her, look, just take them in. Take the chainsaws in and say you need to return them. Get the money. Get the money and come straight back here. Don't fuck around. Just come straight out. So she goes in and returns the chainsaws and decides to lift 4 cartons of cigarettes. And she comes strolling out, and there's security guards tearing out after her. Some cops in the parking lot flash on their sirens, head straight after. She's running and holding on to those goddamn cigarettes. So I couldn't leave her there. I couldn't leave her there. So I whip around the lot and fling open the door. She jumped in with the car moving. I couldn't just leave her there, man. I have this drug problem. And I had this game going. I was kind of proud, man. I think I can beat this one. And he didn't, but I did see him a few years later. And fortunately, other things caught up with him and came bust descanse. So those are some of the poems from Street of Knives, one of my books I'll be promoting on my site. And since we're coming up on Memorial Day, I have one poem that is directly related to the war experience. I'm not a soldier. I'm not a vet or anything like that, but a lot of the people in my family, a lot of the people I love are soldiers. And as I've said many times, that I hate war, but I respect courage and sacrifice. And this poem I read, I was sort of commissioned to write a few poems for an Armistice Day event, of all things. And this is called Johnny and His Gun. It starts off with a quote, "Johnny, get your gun. Take it on the run. Hear them calling, you and me." Great Uncle Louis Lenhart was a really good guy, unfailingly polite, head over heels for my great aunt, Rosalie McCormick, in the Happy Valley of northern PA. He loved to chat, and after he was drafted in 1917, he wrote at least 60 letters to Great Aunt Rose. Letters full of wonder at the sights of New York City and then parts of France, cathedrals, countrysides. These were the topics. Of country boy turned doughboy, Great Uncle Louis didn't go into any detail about being infantry in the AEF, American Expeditionary Forces. And all of a sudden, the letters stopped, resumed, but in much shorter format. Postcards with German postmarks. Great Uncle Louis was captured by German forces and stayed in one of their POW camps for almost a year. But amazingly enough, the postcards kept coming, constantly reassuring my frightened and worried great aunt and his mom, too. He didn't talk about the violence of the camps, but noted that they worked very hard, very long hours. He didn't get to see a doctor after a dental illness. He was a POW. He did mention making friends with French soldiers who shared some food when they could. It was many letters after his release. Great Uncle Louis did mention they wouldn't have survived without Red Cross provisions that did make it to the men. Great Uncle Louis did finally come home, marry Aunt Rose, become a successful educator and beloved member of our family. He's the one we know about, but all we know is that cousin Bob Eigler was gassed in the camps and dead before age 30. Johnny got his gun. Louis got his freedom. Cousin Bob made it home just in time to die. Thank you, Uncle Louis. Thank you, Cousin Bob. And one of my side projects has to do with those letters from my great uncle that I read, and might be putting that into a separate book. Anyway, thanks for listening, and I hope everybody's safe, and I'll see you next week.